Well, it's Mob Movie Monday. Got a great one for you today, and I can only tell you this. Say hello to my little friend. Hey everyone, welcome to another sit down with Michael Franzese, and today is Mob Movie Monday, favorite of all of you out there. And today we're doing the movie Scarface. Not Al Capone's Scarface, but Scarface with Al Pacino, produced in the early 80s, a great film. In my opinion, I think was one of Al Pacino's best roles. I liked him in that and Donnie Brasco, two of my favorite roles of his. But it was a great film. It was received high acclaim. It did pretty well at the box office. And it's something that I'm familiar with. During the early 80s, I was kind of running around Miami at that time, Fort Lauderdale, Florida, doing a bunch of things, had a home back then. So I'm kind of familiar with what was going on with, that whole drug scene down in Miami during that time. So we're going to review it today. Hope everybody's doing well. 2021 has started off good, I hope, for all of you. Some interesting things happening, I would say, but we'll see how this year plays out. Hope all of you that are dealing with COVID or have dealt with COVID are improving, getting by, and hopefully things get back to somewhat normal this year. So let's get into the film. You know, an interesting time, for those of you that are history buffs. It was the Cuban Revolution when Castro knocked Batista out. I think it was in January of 1959. Communist rule comes over Cuba. Things get very, very tough back then. In 1980, there was something called the Mariel boat lift, where because the conditions were so bad in Cuba, they had no money, no food, no employment. Castro allowed people that wanted to migrate to the United States to go. They got in boats and they headed over to the United States. And we took in several 100,000 at that point in time. And, it was a real tough time for things that were going on in Cuba back then. And, we spoke a little about this in prior videos about how the mob, we had some interests in Cuban gambling back at that time. And when the revolution came, we left also. And that's when Vegas started to come about and so on and so forth. So we went through that. But, some fun facts, I think, some facts about the film that you may not be aware of. It was written by Oliver Stone, directed by Brian De Palma. Great team, great production team. And Tony Montana was not based upon the character Al Capone. As a matter of fact, the whole movie was fictional. There is some talk that it might have been loosely based upon some drug dealer from Bolivia. I don't know how true that is. If you're aware of Oliver Stone, he's pretty much a history buff. He also wrote and directed the movie JFK. It was a great film. So he's into these kind of, historical, political type of movies. And he created the character Tony Montana, Scarface. And the name Montana was based upon his football hero, which was Joe Montana from San Francisco. He played with the San Francisco team, so the 49ers. So that was where he got the name from. So, and at that time, there was a big government crackdown on coke in the United States. And it was something that I was very familiar with. You probably know my sister and my brother both had a cocaine problem during that time. And, so I was kind of battling things within my own life because of my family at that time. So the government was really cracking down on coke. That was kind of the number one drug at that point in time. And another thing, when this film was, you're going to see it was very graphic. I'm sure most of you have seen it. If you haven't, watch it. Don't watch it with your kids or maybe your wife or your girlfriend might think it's a little bit too graphic, but guys, watch it. It was brilliant in that regard. But originally it was supposed to get an X rating. The ratings board wanted to give it an X because it was so violent. And that would have killed the film. They were trying to get an R rating. So I think Brian De Palma and Oliver Stone actually went to the ratings board and said, look, some of the violence in this film, it's accurate, it's true, it's in DEA and FBI reports, and we're trying to educate people by letting them see that the drug trade, the drug business is no good. So based upon, I guess, their juice and, their power to convince them, they got an R rating on the film. At that time, this was filmed for 2 weeks, I believe, in Miami. But all of the Cubans, they didn't want it. They were really in an uproar over this film being produced. They didn't like it. They thought it gave the Cubans a bad name. And they protested so much that the production was moved after 2 weeks to Los Angeles, and it was finished there. Another fun fact about this film, through many scenes, or at least a couple of scenes, Pacino is seen sniffing cocaine. And the coke that they used was actually powdered milk. But Pacino complained after that his nostrils were never the same. He had trouble with his nostrils for years. He may still have it, I don't know. But it was powdered milk. There was some story at the time, I remember, that it might have been really cocaine on the set because there was so much cocaine around. I remember in Studio 54 and all these places that we hung out, cocaine was everywhere. But that's never been verified. But that is, as a fact, he was sniffing powdered milk, and it did affect his nostrils. So shows you, don't sniff anything. Another interesting fact about the film, there was a lot of money laundering. There's a couple of scenes in there, which we're going to go through the scenes, where they had to launder the money. And one of these days, I'm going to do a video on money laundering because, as you know, gasoline had a lot of cash, and we had to do, a lot in laundering the money so that we could make it legit and spend it properly. But I'll get into that in another video. So that's a couple of little behind-the-scene facts about the film and the kind of atmosphere that it was produced in back then. Real stuff going on in Miami, a lot of drugs coming in from different places. And I got to tell you, too, I don't recall that the Cubans were the big drug dealers back then. Obviously, it was the Colombians and, had the cartels and all that history. Yes, from Mexico. Wasn't really the Cubans, but this story was built around Tony Montana, who was a Cuban refugee. So let's get into some of my favorite scenes. You may have seen it and have another one. If you do, let me know. We can get into it. But a couple of my favorite scenes. It starts off where, you see the refugees coming over in the boat, and then they have to get into the United States, and they're questioned. And they're questioned by law enforcement and immigration agents. And Tony Montana, Pacino is in there, and he's being, interrogated. His answers are classic. He was terrific. You'll enjoy it. The cops, and I call them cops just because they were agents, were pretty rough on him. They were trying to really find out who was coming in, whether they were criminals. So at one point in time, though, in this scene, I thought it was great. Pacino gets pretty upset, and he tells him, you know what, I'm a political refugee. He said, I ate octopus 3 times a day for several years. I had to work for pennies. He said, that's communism. So whatever you do to me here, you want to throw me in jail, whatever you want to do to me is going to be better than what I lived through for the past several years there. And people, I'm telling you something. He gave you a little glimpse of what communism is all about. Okay, you don't want to live in Cuba. You don't want to live in communist China. You don't want to live in places where there's communist rule. Your freedom is not there anymore. Your life is not your own. And I'm only telling you this. If you see socialism in this country starting to gain traction, beware. Because socialism normally leads to communism, and that's something we never want in America. And I'm not talking about Republican, Democrat. I'm talking about the word socialism and the ideology socialism. We don't want it. Leads to worse things. So that's that. It was a great scene. Another great scene for me was when he visits his mother. After a certain amount of time, his mother had migrated over, and his sister. He hadn't seen them for a while, and he goes and visits his mother. She's very cold to him because she believes that he's doing criminal activity. Cuban people are very proud, and they didn't like the fact that, some of the people were dealing in drugs and some of them were criminals. They didn't like that. Same like Italians. I'll be honest with you, too. A lot of legal, legitimate Italians, they resent the mafia. They resent the fact that, we give them a bad name, or we gave them a bad name at the time. That's understandable. These are hardworking people, and they didn't like the criminal, aura that was put around their ethnicity. And I understand that. So she was very cold to him. The sister was warm to him. She loved him. She liked seeing him. But the mom didn't want any part of it. She said, no, you clean up your act or you get out of here. I don't want you around the sister. It's a great scene, great family kind of scene. Another scene that I thought was great is there's a scene with money where he starts to, get involved in the drug business. He's making a ton of money. He's got money counters everywhere. And, it's just a great scene when you see all this cash flying around. And look, I can kind of relate to that. I'm not going to say I was making the kind of money that he was making there, billions maybe, but we were doing pretty good. We had a lot of cash at one time. I'll tell you one quick story. I was dealing with a bank out in Long Island, and the bank officer there was great. And our business had really exploded. We brought the Russians in. We were making a lot of money, bringing in a lot of cash. And as far as the banker was concerned, we were doing legit business. So one day I call him. I'm not going to tell you his name. A great guy, though. He was brought in front of the grand jury, stood up, and he was a great guy. But anyhow, I said to him, so-and-so, you got a basement in this bank? He says, yeah. I said, come on, let's go downstairs. So we go downstairs, and the basement is there, and it's kind of empty. It wasn't finished. And I said, look, business is really increasing. I'm going to have a lot of cash. I'm going to have you wiring it out to different people. It's going to be brought in on a daily basis. Here's what I want you to do. I want you to make this basement just for me. We're going to put in counters. I'll pay for everything. We're going to put in a safe. We're going to put in counters, hire a couple of attendants. We'll give you some money counters. And I want this basement to be for me. And believe me, you won't be sorry. So he said, hey, fine, no problem, do it. So I did. I spent about 30 grand at the time. We finished the basement. We put in counters. We bought, the money counting machines at that time. We hired a couple of attendants. And we started to bring cash in, a couple of $1 million a week down there. He was happy as can be, and he was wiring it out for us. So I got to tell you, it's a nice feeling when you're seeing all that kind of cash and it's yours, or a good portion of it is yours. But so I can kind of relate to that scene. And then he had to start to wash the money. You had to wash it, and that's. It's not easy, and I'm going to get into that because that's a whole nother video. But I can tell you some of the ways that I did it. We can see in the movie some of the ways that he was doing it, but there's a lot involved in a scheme like that. Another scene, a drug deal is going bad. Tony Montana goes into an apartment house in Miami to meet these guys to do a drug deal. Well, they want to rob him. And, there's a scene in there when they have him in the bathroom. And the guys that were robbing Tony, the other drug dealers, have a chainsaw, and they cut up his friend, and now they're going to cut him up. A very graphic scene. As a matter of fact, this scene was supposed to be taken out of the movie. However, it was based upon a true scene. Oliver Stone got this from looking through DEA and FBI records and seeing that was a real event. It really happened in another situation. So they left it in. Again, they got an R rating for this. This alone could have been an X rating, but very graphic scene. But, Pacino was terrific in that scene also. So another one, and this kind of hits home, Cubans, Italians, I don't know. But there's a scene in there when Stephen Bauer, who's Tony Montana's right-hand guy, is falling in love with his sister. I mean, they're really falling in love. Well, Tony don't like that because in Tony's mind, he's a drug dealer, his brother's a drug dealer, and that's not good enough for his sister. Now, I got to tell you something. I can really relate to something like this because people, I'm telling you, there's a lot said about, mob life and who kills who and this and that and that. I want to tell you this. When my sister was strung out on drugs, seeing her with some of the company that she kept, guys that I knew were putting, needles in her arms and supplying her with drugs. I'm going to be honest with you. The worst thing I ever did in that life was in retaliation for those people hurting my sister. And I can't say I have any regrets about it. I'm being perfectly honest with you because, she was a young girl. She was in her 20s. She was a beautiful kid. And, seeing her in some of the situations that she was in, hanging around some of these drug dealers, it made me crazy. I mean, I just couldn't help it. And had a rough couple of years with her, not only me, my whole family. My brother too, but it's different with my brother. He was a guy, he was a boy, he was in control of what he was doing. But when you see somebody that you love, that's a woman, your sister, God forbid, one of your children, strung out on drugs, knowing that somebody is doing that to her, it's a hard thing to accept, believe me. And I didn't accept it. And, as a result, I did what I did back then. But so Tony in this, he was upset. He didn't want his sister hanging out or being involved with a drug dealer. It gets to a point where they get married. There's a scene where they get married. Tony doesn't know that. He walks in the door. He sees his friend, and his sister is coming down the stairs kind of dressed in a nightgown. Doesn't realize that they're married. He's so enraged that he shoots and kills his best friend right there. Horrible scene. But again, I can somewhat relate to that because of situations that happened in my own life. My sister died of an overdose of drugs at 27 years old, but she started earlier. She was on it for at least 10 years, and very, very difficult to see something like that. Great scene at the end. You know, they come into his compound, and they come with machine guns, and Tony Montana's a crazy guy. His sister actually gets killed during that time. He's in his office, but he's fighting back. He's not giving in easy. He's fighting back. A real tough guy. And you've probably all seen that scene. It's very famous. He's shooting them. They're coming up the stairs. He's well outnumbered. But he opens up the door to his office and he says, "Say hello to my little friend." And he starts shooting everybody. It's a brilliant scene. And they end up, they're shooting him. He gets killed. I mean, he's talking through all the bullets hitting his body. It was very, very graphic, but an amazing scene. And finally, he falls headfirst into a pool that he had in the middle of his house there, you know, a fountain. But it was a great scene. So all in all, that's how it ends. Again, totally fictional story. But I will tell you this, people, you know, we did a lot of bad things in the mob, no question about it. And I know I get hit on this all the time when I say that we weren't allowed to deal with drugs. I don't know why some people have a problem with that. I never said that guys were not dealing with drugs, but they weren't supposed to. It's not something we were able to do, and I can prove it to you, you know, in many different ways, whatever. Yes, guys were doing it, but we weren't supposed to. And if we in our family dealt with drugs, we got killed. That was the bottom line. It's a dirty business. It really is. It's a ruthless business. I don't have to tell you, you've seen all the stories, you know, in Mexico and Colombia and Albany, you know, El Chapo, you know, the whole thing. A lot of bodies in the drug business. And it's very, very unfortunate. And but you got to understand something. You know, people in the United States, they want the drugs. You know, it's supply and demand, supply and demand. People took advantage of that. It's a tremendous business financially. You know, a lot of money to be made in it. But I can only tell you this from personal experience. I saw what it did to people. I hate anything to do with the drug business. I hate anything to do with drugs. I visited so many people in prison that had drug problems that were in there because of drugs. I'm telling you now, if you're dealing with a drug issue, get it out of your life somehow, some way, whatever you got to do, whether it's rehab, whatever you got to do to get the drugs out of your system, do it. It'll be nothing but destruction in your life. That much I tell you. So that's it for today. You know, another great movie, and I hope you all enjoyed it and enjoyed my review of it. I want to thank everybody again. Subscription rate is going up. MichaelFranzese.com. We got almost 12,000 people now in the community being encouraged all the time. Great content going on. So we appreciate all of those of you that have been coming on board, and it's just growing every single day. Thanks a lot. So that's it for today. How do I always leave you, my friends? Be safe, be healthy. God bless. I will see you next time.